ally in the White House. A pomp-filled welcome for France's president before plunging into a day of talks.
Thank you.
A surprise approval. The president's pick for Secretary of State moves forward, while his Veteran Affairs appointee is sidelined. Life support withdrawn. A terminally ill toddler in England surprises doctors as the Vatican continues to help. And a conversion story, a pro-life leader's journey to Catholicism. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, April 24th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining me from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump issues a stern warning amid the pageantry of an official state visit. The president says if Iran restarts its nuclear program, the country will have bigger problems more than ever before. He made the comment with French President Emmanuel Macron at his side. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The Iran nuclear deal has been a major focus for President Trump and President Macron as the allies meet at the White House. It's one area of disagreement between the two world leaders who seem to have forged a friendship despite their differences. Sounds of unity at the start of the official state visit.
Our two great republics are linked together by the timeless bonds of history.
The opening ceremony here represents a show of solidarity between France and the U.S., but the differing views between President Trump and President Macron are clear.
Mais c'est là aussi que notre avenir et celui de nos enfants se jouent.
Macron notes he and Trump stand on opposite ends of the climate conversation. The president pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement combating global warming last year. Today, Trump bashed another international pact, the Iran nuclear deal, aimed at limiting that country's access to developing nuclear arms.
The Iran deal is a disaster. They're testing missiles, and what is that all about?
Macron had previously noted there was no plan B, but now he says the deal could be used as a framework to build upon.
We have a lot of work to be done together.
Like negotiating the best path forward for trade. President Trump calls for a bilateral agreement with France. The conversation continued in the East Room, where both leaders pledged their commitment to fighting terrorism. And President Trump clarified what he wants from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
They get rid of their nukes, and nobody else would say it. It'd be very easy for me to make a simple deal and claim victory. I don't want to do that. I want them to get rid of their nukes.
President Trump also demands that U.S. allies in the Middle East pay their fair share of cost for waging war against ISIS and other enemies in the region. As for France, President Trump says our two countries are linked together by fate and destiny, and our futures have never looked brighter. Tonight, the Trumps will host a state dinner with President Macron and invited guests in the state dining room behind me. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. The French president isn't the only world leader urging President Trump to stick with the Iran nuclear deal. The Iranian president is warning the U.S. not to pull out of the landmark agreement. Iran's president says the United States will face grave consequences if Washington withdraws from the deal. The State Department says his veiled threats are not helpful in negotiations. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department.
Iran's president tells his citizens during a rally that their nation will stand up to the White House. Hassan Rouhani is also bashing the United States on Iranian state television. And the country's foreign minister, who is visiting New York, says Iran will most likely abandon the nuclear deal if the U.S. pulls out.
We've said that the United States has not lived up to its side of the bargain, that is, to its commitments to lift certain sanctions.
Niall Gardner, a counterterrorism expert, says Iran is lobbying to stop President Trump from exiting the 2015 nuclear deal. That agreement is supposed to curb Iran's controversial nuclear program.
It's a financial bonanza for the Iranian regime. So you've seen the lifting of the freezing of Iranian assets that were previously in place under UN-mandated economic sanctions.
Gardner says Iran isn't the only one with economic interests. Both France and Germany are investing in Iran. President Trump says he wants a better agreement.
It was a terrible deal. It should have never, ever been made. We could have made a good deal or a reasonable deal. The Iran deal is a terrible deal.
Gardner agrees.
So this deal does not allow, for example, the inspection of Iranian missile facilities or its conventional military capability.
The president has vowed to withdraw from the agreement by May 12th, unless negotiators fix what he calls serious flaws.
That was correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel admits the agreement has flaws, but she does say this imperfect deal is better than no deal. She will be in Washington at the end of the week to meet with President Trump. Mike Pompeo, President Trump's choice for Secretary of State, earns the approval of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee only after the president's last-minute overtures to Senator Rand Paul.
I hope that they'll let Trump be Trump and that Pompeo will be a constructive influence and not a destructive one. But from what I've been told and listened to with the director, I think that he is open and understands that his job is that the president is his boss and will listen.
Paul had threatened to veto that nomination. Pompeo's nomination now goes to the full Senate. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he looks forward to voting to confirming him later this week. The confirmation hearing for President Trump's pick to run the Department of Veterans Affairs is delayed indefinitely. Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson's confirmation was scheduled for tomorrow. Sources say lawmakers have growing questions over his qualifications. Jackson is the president's White House doctor. A lawyer who fought the HHS contraceptive mandate for EWTN and Hobby Lobby is confirmed as an appeals court judge. That mandate in Obamacare required employers to provide coverage for contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi is here to break it down. He has the latest. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The Senate voted mostly along party lines to confirm Kyle Duncan. He will now take up a lifetime seat on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, but not without major opposition from Democrats who object to his views, including that marriage is the union of one man and one woman.
Hobby Lobby.
Hobby Lobby.
Hobby Lobby.
Hobby Lobby.
Democrats slam judicial nominee Kyle Duncan. He argued Hobby Lobby's winning case against the Obama administration's contraceptive mandate.
That flawed decision allowed closely held corporations to deny FDA-approved contraceptive coverage to women employees if the company owners objected to the contraception based on their religious beliefs.
Democrats also object to Duncan's support of traditional values.
The right to marriage equality, in his view, would endanger the civil peace. He's also represented Gloucester County, Virginia, in an effort to deny a transgender student's right to use the bathroom aligned with the gender identity.
Despite the objections, the American Bar Association calls him well qualified, and Republicans say Duncan will be a good judge.
Even those who are going to vote no are all impressed once they meet him. His body of work also demonstrates his high respect for legal precedent. He understands that a judge is not an advocate for a particular case.
Duncan represented this network in its fight against the contraceptive mandate. He also appeared on EWTN.
We're not being killed like so many Christians in the Middle East, and we shouldn't pretend that we are. Yeah. But we should perhaps find some courage to actually profess what we believe as Catholics, and to fight for the same principles that our founding fathers fought for, which is the ability to rule ourselves.
Kyle Duncan worked at Beckett Law and also argued twice in front of the Supreme Court, including that case we just talked about, the case of Hobby Lobby. He earlier served the state of Louisiana as Solicitor General and graduated from Columbia University and Louisiana State University. His supporters call him a steadfast defender of religious liberty for people of all faiths. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The driver accused of intentionally plowing a van through a busy Toronto street made his first court appearance today. This comes as investigators work to piece together what led to the incident that killed at least 10 people and injured more than a dozen others.
The entire community of Toronto has shown strength and determination in the face of this tragedy. All Canadians stand united with Toronto today.
The 25-year-old suspect is being held on 10 counts of murder and 13 counts of attempted murder. Police are interviewing witnesses and looking at surveillance video to determine a possible motive. Cardinal Thomas Collins, the Archbishop of Toronto, issued a statement saying, in part, "I invite the Catholic community across the Archdiocese of Toronto to join me in offering our prayers for all those who were killed and injured in the violent incident." Syrian reports say government forces launched a new operation today against rebels. They are targeting underground tunnels used by the Islamic State in southern Damascus. It is the last part of the capital not controlled by President Bashar Assad. The UN is concerned for the fate of thousands of civilians after days of fighting. A Nigerian priest is free after 4 days in captivity. Father Edwin Omorogbe, a parish priest in Benin City, was abducted by unidentified gunmen. He was released Sunday. The motive behind the kidnappings and the parties responsible are unknown. A British judge forbids the parents of a terminally ill toddler from taking him to Italy for treatment. The ruling comes as the child's father says the little boy is surviving after being forced off of life support.
I'm over the moon for the fact that my conscience, my faith and my belief all went into Alfie, and he's just paid me back, hasn't he? And he's here now fighting.
Alfie's parents want to take him to the Vatican's pediatric hospital. The Italian government has granted him citizenship to facilitate his immediate transfer. The case has drawn the attention of Pope Francis, who has made appeals for the boy to be kept alive, saying only God can decide who dies. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, what is the Vatican offering Alfie and his family?
Well, the Bambino Gesù Children's Hospital, located right here on the Janiculum Hill overlooking us, says the Italian military has a plane ready to transport the British toddler to Italy if Britain were to allow this. And Mariella Enoch, the head of the hospital, traveled yesterday to Liverpool with a medical specialist and met Alfie's parents. And she said the plane is ready to take off in a matter of minutes. And we understand she's been in constant contact with the Vatican Secretariat of State, and reportedly consideration was also given to granting Alfie a Vatican passport. But because it's not an EU member, such a move was perhaps discarded.
Now that he does have an Italian passport, is that going to help Alfie's case?
Well, granting Alfie citizenship was very much a diplomatic gesture, highlighting Italy's determination to take on board this child's case, and it's an attempt to beat the British courts and have the boy travel to Rome for cost-free care at the Vatican Pediatric Hospital. Now, today, the Italian ambassador in London, Raffaele Trombetta, implied charges of homicide would be brought against Britain for having removed life support from an Italian citizen. Now, that's a developing story which we'll be keeping a close eye on. Lauren.
That's a little shocking to me. Now, if he were to come to Italy, what kind of treatment could the Vatican hospital offer him?
Sure. Well, let's be clear here. Alfie is terminally ill and has a disease that hasn't been diagnosed. The medical community agree that barring the unexpected or a miracle, Lauren, there is no cure for him. But doctors here want to try forms of palliative care that would accompany the child and alleviate the suffering of the entire family. So it's not just about the toddler. It's also about keeping the whole family together, particularly, let's say, from an emotional perspective as well. And Lauren, if I can add a note on how big this story has become here. Tonight, the Roma soccer team plays against Liverpool in an away match, and the head of sports and leisure at the Diocese of Rome is calling on fans to unite both Liverpool and Roma and to support Alfie's family in the fight to defend life and to defend human dignity.
That is an incredible, incredible story. Juliette Lindley, thank you so much for joining us. EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Pope Francis appoints 3 women as consultors to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The historic decision marks the first time women are named as active contributors and not support staff. Coming up, a change at the top in Armenia after days of mass protests. The former U.S. ambassador to the country joins us. And a health scare for former President George H.W. Bush. Two stories coming out of Armenia today. One, a political crisis. The other, a remembrance of a massacre that began more than a century ago. 10,000 protesters marched to a hilltop memorial marking the killing of 1.5 million Armenians in 1915 by Ottoman Turks. They have been pushing for political change there for 2 weeks. Yesterday, Armenian Prime Minister Sargsyan announced his resignation and accepted their demands for him to step down. Joining me is John Evans, former U.S. ambassador to Armenia from 2004 to 2006, the author of this book, Truth Held Hostage, America and the Armenian Genocide. What then? What now? Ambassador Evans, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Does this political struggle right now surprise you?
No, it's been building for a while. What has surprised a lot of people is that it seems to have caused a breakthrough in what was a very compacted, difficult situation. But of course, the tricky part is what happens next.
Isn't it always? What is the expectation for democracy going forward?
I think the Armenian people very much want a better system than they've had in this post-Soviet world, and they're not alone in that. All the peoples of the former Soviet Union want better conditions, living conditions, and more democracy. But the Armenians have been particularly insistent under the regime that just basically got a crack in it.
Armenians are furious that the Turkish President Erdogan will not recognize what people call a massacre as a genocide.
Yes, well, let's go back for a second. Who are the Armenians? They're an ancient group. Some people find traces of them 5,000 years ago in the Middle East, but certainly 3,000. And they're the oldest nation to have embraced Christianity, which happened in the year 301. And I won't go through all the history of that. There are lots of ups and downs.
Pope Urban, wasn't it Pope Urban? Anyway.
Well,
okay.
There are lots of popes at
right.
that time. But, and Pope Francis, 2 years ago, recognized it was really a succession of massacres.
And he called it genocide.
He did call it genocide.
But President Trump will not. Today, he said, statement by the president on Armenian Remembrance Day, he said, "Today we commemorate one of the worst mass atrocities of the 20th century. You have always called it genocide, even as an ambassador, and you lost your job over it."
Well, I didn't start off calling it a genocide, but when I was brought back to the United States to lecture to various groups, usually on university campuses, I was very frank about my own view that this had been a genocide. We have to look at the definition of genocide. It involves killing members of a racial, ethnic, or religious group or national group. And I think that what happened in 1915 on through 1918 did constitute a genocide. The short answer to why the United States does not use the word genocide is our alliance with Turkey.
And that means that President Erdogan is a NATO ally and therefore does not want we are not pushing him to say it's a genocide. We are not pushing through the UN to him.
Well, there are lots of discussions that go on between diplomats behind closed doors. And I do not doubt that there have been some very difficult discussions, particularly in the last 18 months or 2 years, because of what's been going on in Turkey generally.
Where Erdogan is massing more and more power.
Well, he seems to be headed in that direction, away from being a kind of model democracy for the Middle East to being something else which is much more authoritarian.
America has one of the oldest Christian populations. Armenia, as you mentioned, the oldest Christian populations. And when Pope Francis was there, as we can see right here, he surprised a lot of people and made reference to this Armenian genocide. Do you think we will ever see a day when the massacre is universally recognized as genocide?
I think, as Henry Kissinger also once said, that day will come. But the important thing is what happens in Turkey, how the Turks relate to their own difficult history. All nations have dark closets that they are reluctant to look into, and we have them too. But the hallmark of a democracy is the willingness to face up to one's history.
Thank you so much. Ambassador John Evans, the author of Truth Held Hostage. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Former President George H.W. Bush is in the intensive care unit at a Houston hospital. The 93-year-old was admitted Sunday morning, one day after burying his wife, Barbara. The former president is being treated for a blood infection and appears to be recovering. A family spokesman says Bush 41 is eager to get well so he can go to his summer home in Kennebunkport, Maine. Up next, a story of true conversion, almost 3 decades in the making. Planned Parenthood sues Indiana over new abortion regulations. The law requires medical providers to report patient information when treating women for complications from abortions. The president of Indiana Right to Life says the provision brings needed transparency to the abortion industry. Planned Parenthood says it imposes unique and burdensome obligations. After years of prayer, and in his words, a whole lot of wrestling with God, pro-life advocate and Protestant David B. Wright is now a Catholic and proudly sharing his conversion story. Joining me now is David B. Wright, founder and former CEO of 40 Days for Life, a global pro-life ministry. Welcome to the program.
It is wonderful to be back.
We're talking about your conversion. It is a beautiful story. Ever since you met your wife, Margaret, what was it, 1990? She took you to Mass with her. You were not Catholic. And now, 28 years later, you've converted. What took you so long?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I'm just a very slow learner, but we attended Mass together every week for 28 years. And by the grace of God, there was a lot of time there that God was working on me. Certainly my wife put in a lot of prayers. You should have seen the radiant joy and the tears on her face at the Easter Vigil when I was received into full communion with the church. But a lot of it was just having to work through lots of theological issues and then really finally getting out of the way and allowing God to speak right to me.
Like what? What theological issues?
So I had to work through just about everything. Apostolic succession, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, Marian devotion. And every one of those I would spend time, I would read, I would pray about, I would try to learn, and some of them were easy hurdles for me to work through. Others took a lot longer time, but just about everything that anyone from a Protestant background, as I came from, would have to work through on their journey into the Catholic Church, I had to work through, and a lot of times I had to spend a lot of time just to make sure that I understood what it was that I was coming towards.
What was the hardest one?
Good question. Probably for me it was Marian devotion.
Why?
And
most people who are not Catholic say that.
I probably just threw a lot of stigma that had been placed in my life from my Protestant upbringing, and a lot of it as well is I was perceiving people's Marian devotion as worship and not interpreting it in the way it actually was, in the way the church teaches it.
In intercession.
Correct. Correct. So just as I began to see, and then over time, now looking back, all of the different major milestones in my life that led to me coming into the church, I see Mary's fingerprints all over and now consider that one of the great blessings that I've gotten to discover in the fullness of the church.
I'm curious about your relationship with your wife, Margaret, because all over these years, she probably has been praying for your conversion. How has this deepened your relationship with your wife?
On Palm Sunday, the last Mass we went to on a Sunday before the Easter Vigil, it brought me to tears to realize that after all these years of not being together at communion, when she and the children would go forward and I would stay in the pew, that was the last Sunday. And today, to be able to be in full communion together as a couple and to share that final element of our faith together, it has unleashed an entire whole new degree of blessings in our marriage that I could never have even imagined. The sacramental nature of marriage is just a beautiful part of our shared Catholic identity today.
Before we go, we only have a little bit of time. You were the founder of 40 Days for Life. You have left.
Correct.
And you don't know what's next. How hard is that?
It's difficult, but following God is never going to be easy, and a lot of it is just a faith journey. God led me to get involved and start 40 Days for Life. God led me through a decade through that season, and I'm trusting now, as my wife and I have been praying about a new ministry project, which hasn't been publicly announced, that He'll lead us as He has all the way along.
David B. Wright, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to say, Catholic convert.
Amen.
What a great story to end a lovely Tuesday evening. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless.